Nigel, welcome. Now, around this time, you should have been settling into the Savoy Theatre for the long-awaited Broadway transfer of Sunday in the Park with George, with Jake Gyllenhaal. And here you are talking to me instead. I mean, the rescheduling gives us all a little bit of hope, but this is a year when none of us are going to get back.
Yeah, it's quite surreal. When lockdown hit, I was actually about to open Caroline or Change on Broadway.
Yep, indeed.
So we were 2 hours away from our dress rehearsal when Broadway got shut down at 5 o'clock. So that was quite surreal. And then, yes, I was meant to have a few nice weeks off and then spend 4 weeks rehearsing Sunday. And I was trying to work it out earlier. I think I'm meant to be in tech at the moment. Anyway, this is just as fun, Ed. I'm very glad to be speaking to you.
But you know, when I said this is a year we don't get back, I mean the damage to the arts is insurmountable, really. I mean, I just don't know. It's unimaginable at the moment. I do hope something changes, but it seems that politicians of all colours just simply think the arts are a luxury, and they just have a total misunderstanding of what is required to actually get them to function.
Yeah, I'm looking on with envy at sort of France and Italy and all these places who are announcing packages for the arts, and it just doesn't feel like we have that conversation really happening yet.
No, Germany as well. I mean, something like 50 billion euros being put into the arts. Look, when it gets to the stage where only Prince Charles is speaking up for us, then
yeah, that's bleak, isn't it?
It's bleak. So, how have you been dealing with the time? You've been teaching? Have you been reading, watching Netflix, doing all the things the rest of us have been doing?
I think when I first got back from the States, there was a kind of adrenaline rush of actually trying to pack up my flat in the States and get back. And then I had a couple of weeks where I didn't allow myself to mourn the shows that weren't going to happen. I thought, oh no, there were much worse things happening in the world than a show being cancelled. But then actually I realised I was very upset about Caroline not opening. And you know, I'd really psyched myself up for Sunday. It was a big gig. I'd done lots of prep on the score. I was really excited to work with Jake and Annaleigh. And I realised I really was gutted about it, or I am gutted about it. So I allowed myself a bit of mourning, not too much. And then I think, like everyone else, I've been in and out of feeling very motivated. So, you know, making sourdough and playing the piano and going back on some classical rep I haven't played for a long time, and then watching Netflix and eating cake. So it's hard, isn't it?
It's really hard, and I think all of us are experiencing that extreme up and extreme down contrasts all the time. So yes, you were right in the thick of the Broadway transfer of Caroline or Change. I mean, a wonderful opportunity for the mighty Sharon D. Clarke, who was so stunning in it. One of the most thoroughly decent people in the business, I think. I've never met a nicer actor than her.
No, there's no side to Sharon. She's just as glorious as you think. And considering that's such a tough role as well.
Yeah.
I know even in the midst of tiredness, and I never once heard a crossword from her. She's extraordinary. And also because obviously there's quite a lot of really intense scenes with the kids in that show. And she initiated lots of sort of hugs. And so whenever there was we did a fight call, she'd always make sure there were hugs afterwards, which I'm sure we are not allowed to do anymore. But
she is wonderful. I did an event at Pizza Express Holborn with her, and it was right in the thick of winter, and it had decided to snow, and about 14 people turned up, and she gave 190%.
Lucky them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the genius that is Jeanine Tesori, because you were also, of course, at the helm of Fun Home in London, the Old Vic, and she's a shining example of a creative force who refuses to compromise in the name of accessibility or commercialism, except possibly with Shrek, where one might think she had perhaps taken the king's shilling, but that's a bit unkind.
I think the extraordinary thing about working with Jeanine is that You really can't believe that Caroline, the score of Caroline and Fun Home are from the same pen.
Yeah.
And then I saw Soft Power last year when I was in the States. I think she adapts, of anyone I've worked with, she adapts to her collaborators so closely. So I think Caroline really reflects Tony's brilliant, crazy brain and the density of ideas that's in there, compared to the sort of stripped down nature of Fun Home, where all the songs are very short, very simple. There's little repetition through the score. And I do find it fascinating that they're all from the same person.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think of Thoroughly Modern Millie as well, that wearing the style so well, which she does. But the other thing about her is that none of her music draws attention to itself. It just belongs, doesn't it? And
yeah, I agree. It's there's a modesty about Caroline and again, the lack of repetition in Caroline, actually, it just develops and develops. I never feel that she writes a verse and thinks, oh, I like that. And so I'm going to use that hook again because it's really cool. It's only, she strips everything back to what's necessary.
Yeah, and her total immersion in the theatricality of the music and her collaborator is something that she's developed from the inside out. I mean, where the climaxes come in these pieces, and they're tremendous in both Fun Home and Caroline. Let's turn to Follies, because what a special piece of work that was. Only possible, I think, at the National Theatre. The last time I saw it prior to the National Theatre production was the last Broadway revival, and I thought that was pretty sensational in terms of the acting quality. And I suddenly sat there and thought, what a masterpiece this is when you've got the actors to pull it off.
Yeah. I mean, it requires such big forces, doesn't it? It's sort of, I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime show for me, and I don't know who else, apart from a subsidised house, could really give it the orchestral forces it needs. But also the time. We had, I can't remember, but at least I think 8 or 9 weeks rehearsal, and I think it's a very complex piece musically and dramatically, and you need all of that time to give it. I can't imagine getting Follies up in 4 weeks, for instance.
No, and there is an opulence about that era. Anyway, I think the Broadway revival, the band was something like 29.
Yeah.
It was the biggest band on Broadway, unheard of nowadays, of course. What was yours?
We were, I think we were 21.
Okay, that's pretty big nowadays. I mean, let's talk a bit about that, because, the bands have been diminishing. When you think of the golden age of Broadway, and you think of shows like Carousel, which I think had a band of 39 or 40, and was largely acoustic, of course. That's the other thing, acoustic versus, all this electronic technology. Where do you stand on that? I suppose you just have to embrace it if you're an MD these days.
Yeah, now that we have better miking for strings, for example, we actually didn't have any electronic instruments for Follies, so we were all acoustic, but you can mic the strings in a way that you don't need as full a sections as you used to. There are also very clever ways of mixing keyboards with strings. It's usually the strings that get cut, to be honest. That's where, when you hear figures like 35, 40 in the originals, it would have been the banks of strings that did it mainly. And there are just ways of reducing them, and also you need a really big pit to fit all those people in. And especially, we don't tend to use pits as much these days. On Follies, for instance, we were behind, but even that would have been a squash to get many more people in that space.
So often nowadays, you really don't know what you're hearing. You think you're hearing a big string section, and there's a chap there sitting on his keyboard. I find that such a cheat, really, that it's a joy to hear actual instrumentation. But again, you have to roll with the punches, don't you? I think
as long as you mix real instruments in with them,
yes.
It's when they get replaced, you cannot completely recreate the attack of a string player. So if it's cleverly mixed with a sensitive sound designer, then, like Paul Grutius, for example, is such a genius at doing that kind of work. I think when it gets fully synthesized, I think no one's fooled by it, really.
What's the toughest part about being an MD in the West End or the National Theatre. But I mean, obviously you've got the luxury of more support system and more time. But what's the toughest part for you? What's the part you enjoy least and the part you enjoy most? I'm sure you enjoy conducting. I can tell you do.
Yeah, I love conducting. I love the rehearsal period. There aren't, I mean, you're dealing with tiredness levels, but that's the same with anyone on a production. But you do tend to be, for example, when you're doing orchestral calls, you'll probably be working 10 till 6 with the band, or 10 till 6 with the actors, and then you may have an orchestral call in the evening. So that's when you start pulling the sort of 13-hour days. And after, a week of those, you know about it. And then if you add, the stress of getting to a first preview on top of that, often you're hitting quite stressful moments of the process at your most tired. So you have to keep a lot of good humour in those moments. It's
funny, I never think of you as a person who might succumb to stress, because you have this wonderful way of lightening the load. We've spent a bit of time together, and we've done the Stephen Sondheim Society Student Performer of the Year a couple of times, and I'm always in awe of your kind of level-headedness, but I guess you do succumb occasionally. I'd love to see you mad, is what I'm saying.
That doesn't happen, but if it does, then you have to dig deep to stop it showing, because it's never useful. Yeah. The other times, I guess, I wouldn't say tricky. The things that need negotiating are if you're at the start of a new relationship with a creative, so say a new director, and you're in the casting process. I think the casting process requires a lot of trust between the creatives, and you may have to build that trust very, very quickly. Trying to convince the director that perhaps someone might be very slightly pitchy, off the note, but they may be the most marvelous actor, and then trying to really negotiate those delicate conversations about, how far to bend, and having really frank discussions up front, so that you don't have to have a more difficult one further down the line.
Well, it was interesting that the cast changes on Follies were fascinating, and it was fascinating because how different were Imelda Staunton and Joe Riding. I mean, both equally valid, both very different characters in a way, approaching it very differently. That must have been fascinating to observe at close quarters.
Yeah, I thought they were both extraordinary in their own ways. Imelda, I'd worked with before. In fact, I'd worked with both Imelda and Joe before. We'd done a Victoria Wood thing together, so I knew her quite well. And I knew that her process has a very sort of long lead in. I feel like Imelda makes lots of decisions ahead of getting into the rehearsal room. She's so prepared. But as is Joe, and they made such different choices on the material, but I thought they were both astonishing in their own way.
Yes. You mentioned Victoria Wood just now, and you were very close friends, I know. And I was thinking about her the other day because she was being remembered, and it was you, Nigel, that put her my way over this Joyce Hatto film she made with Francesca Annis and who was Alpha Molina. Yeah. And for people who don't know about it, this was an extraordinary true story, which revolved around Gramophone magazine, which I've written for many years, and a man whose wife was a modest pianist, but certainly not a great pianist, and he palmed off her recordings as other people's recordings as hers, and he was found out only by the technology that he used to create this fraud. Extraordinary. And I met Victoria then to talk about it, and I thought her film, her script, her film was extraordinary. For people who haven't seen it, it's really worth catching. But the story was stranger than fiction, and I remember saying to her, I said, "How did you find him?" Because she actually met him, And
Yeah.
she said, "Oh, he's a total Walter Mitty." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "Well, how did you know?" And she said, "Well, he served me lemon drizzle cake, which he said he'd made himself, and it was so obviously Marks and
He
Spencer's that yes."
That's
but
brilliant.
but you, I mean, she was an extraordinary lady, and you had quite a close relationship, didn't you, Nigel?
Yeah, we worked together for I think about 10 years, and I've actually just read Jasper Rees's biography of her because I helped him. Well, I did some talks with him for it, and
I
I just
didn't realise
proofed.
Jasper had written the biography.
Yeah,
Yeah?
so that's coming out. I just sort of proofread it, and it's fantastic. But it was really wonderful to relive some of those stories and the times we spent together. Um, it was amazing to work with someone who she could go to the BBC and say what project she wanted to do and what forces she needed. To have that sort of clout was really wonderful. And so, yeah, we did lots on stage and lots on TV together. I learnt a lot from her. She was
Yeah.
great and a really great friend.
I think the biggest bugbear for her was people always expecting her to be funny.
I know.
And
She
she's
used to be very happy to just sit in silence. So,
Yes, I know. When she came to visit here, we did the recording downstairs, and the chap on the desk, the concierge, when I told him who'd just been in the building and left, he was so pissed off that he
Yeah.
hadn't managed to, because she just looked so ordinary and
Yeah.
and behaved in such an ordinary manner. I remember her parting words to me were, I said, "Well, thank you so much for doing it." She said, "Oh, no, anytime." She said, "Well, not anytime, actually."
That's very her.
That's very her, isn't it?
We used to go for supper together, and we'd happily sit for sort of 5 minutes at a time, just thinking. And I think realizing that you didn't have to fill the gaps all the time was the key to friendship with Vic, and one of the keys to friendship.
It's one of the great keys to friendship generally. Companionable silence, I think,
Yes, I think so.
is the phrase. I wanted to talk a bit about Bend It Like Beckham because it's very close to my heart. I'm a huge Goodall fan, as you may have noticed
Yeah.
over the years. But I just felt, I mean, Howard's a great craftsman and a great melodist and very sophisticated musician. That piece for me, or that score, was so underestimated by people. I kept coming across people who said, "Oh, I don't understand what you hear in it." And they just weren't hearing its sophistication. And I wonder whether it was to do with the staging itself of the show, whether the show was the problem rather than I'm putting you on the spot here, rather than the score material.
Well, I'd say in answer to that, it is good to go back and listen to the album and hear the detail of it. I mean, there was a lot going on visually, and I think, yeah, some of which was really marvelous. Alita's work was fantastic, the choreography.
Yeah.
But if you go back and listen to the contribution of Kuljit, who did the percussion and was sort of our Indian advisor, and Howard's work, which I think is constantly surprising, and his harmonic changes is so unexpected.
Yeah.
And Charles's work, which is again one of the great craftsmen we have.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I feel it's they're really good tunes. Then I always feel that about Howard.
And complete songs too. I mean, People Like Us is a really extraordinary song, I think, because it says so much in a very elegant way. And of course, those great finales of Howard's where he plays counterpoint with,
builds.
yes,
Yeah.
I think possibly it was the pacing of the show. I can say this, and maybe having the director direct the stage show was not such a good idea. But if you listen to the demo that was made of the opening number, it's just so much more exciting than what's on the album.
Yeah.
Tempo for a start was everything had to slow down for the staging, it seemed to me. But there you go. You're
It's hard for me to comment.
Yes,
I'm
I
being
know.
diplomatic, as is my want.
But no, it should have done hugely better. Wasn't there talk of a national tour which I could see it doing really well on?
Yeah, it went to Canada recently, and I think there were plans to take it on a US tour after that. But I think it would do really well as and when theatres open up again. Um, I think it's got such a huge heart, and whatever faults sort of may have ended up in the final piece, it always made me cry when I did show watch.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I've always trusted in my own musicality. I mean, there's no way you can be a music journalist critic for so many years without trusting your musicality, because that's the essence of it all, really. It doesn't matter what your know-how and technical background is, or historical knowledge. The fact is, if you can't recognize when someone makes a beautiful melody or makes a beautiful phrase, then you might as well give up the job. But I think there are wonderful things in that score, and I as with all Howard's shows, and it's just such a shame there hasn't been a massive commercial success.
Did you see the Girlfriends? Go to the Girlfriends concert that happened?
I wasn't able to go, but I've heard the recording.
That
wonderful.
show's wonderful, and I didn't know it at all. And afterwards, I actually said, Howard, please bring a songbook out, because compared with many of the songs that get brought to audition, they're gems. So actually, luckily, he has now published a songbook for female voice, and hopefully he'll do the same for guys. Because I just think the proportions of them are excellent, and obviously the tunes are great. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of auditions, you must sit through so many. And having sat next to you for the monstrous day of auditions we do for the Stephen Sondheim Student Performer of the Year, and how we never actually say anything, but it's all this kind of telepathy and facial expressions that say it all, really, you know, where the photograph goes, on which pile the photograph goes.
Yeah. There's all sorts of codes with with Emma Rice. I have a code where I think if I leave I shouldn't say this. I'm going to have to change the code after this. But
okay.
If I put the piano on top, the pencil on top of the piano, I love them. If it goes on the music stand, then okay, maybe. And if I drop the pencil on the floor, it means please don't fall in love with this actor.
But isn't it interesting what people choose to do for auditions, and the choices they make, but also looking at the younger kids coming out of drama school. I mean, when we've been doing the Sondheim competition, it's wonderful when someone comes in that you can actually hear. It's that kind of extraordinary kind of, I don't know, the microphone's going to do the work for me.
I often think in terms of not just volume, but clarity of language. So, for example, I always tell the story, but when I used to show watch Follies like once a week to note the cast, and I stood at the back of the Ollie circle one night and watched, and I swear I had my pen poised for any notes from Imelda, desperate to think of any notes, because she was just so consistent and brilliant. And I swear every consonant was placed, every end consonant was there. There was not one diction note I gave. And I feel like that's the main thing I feel lacking, is a really strong use of language. You know, naturalistic acting doesn't mean that your speech and your diction doesn't need to be heightened as it would be in the theatre.
Oh, exactly, and of course Sondheim absolutely demands this, which is why he so much favours. The words come first. There's no question. I think with Sondheim, he's word led, and you know the lyrics are so brilliant. I mean, the music's brilliant too, but it's all of a package. But I do think he's word led, and I think if the text doesn't come across, then you're lost with him.
Yeah, absolutely.
With Sunday in the Park with George, which is a total masterpiece. I mean, with him, the old chestnut about, the first act's a complete musical in itself, and where do you go from there? Well, that's the excitement of it. The same with Into the Woods. You know, you have no idea where you're going after that interval. Tell us about... I mean, you've watched Jake Gyllenhaal's performance on video, I gather, because since you knew you were doing the show. Tell us what's special about it, and how excited you are about the collaboration.
Well, I did it was a sort of private party, but and Jake sang a couple of numbers just before Christmas. And I said to him at the time, I can't think of anyone else on the planet at the moment more suitable for this role. Vocally, he's fantastic, but also he's the intensity of his acting is so right for George. And yeah, one of those moments where you think, oh, I don't need to lie to an actor. I genuinely believe this. Not that I would ever lie, but I didn't feel like I had to blow smoke. It was really in that moment. I can't imagine anyone with that intensity. And Annaleigh as well. I know we talk about Jake a lot, but Annaleigh just fantastic.
Yes.
So I really hope we can get the dates to work.
Tell me what does he have a musical background, or is he coming kind of cold to this piece as a piece of music drama?
He did The Little Shop, which of these he did A Little Shop because these all came through Encores, which is the series that Jeanine runs in New York.
Yeah.
So very randomly, Jeanine Tesori is one of the lead producers of Sunday in the Park. So, there are lots of sort of circles. And Jeanine has worked a lot with Jake, so they work together on Little Shop. And yeah, she's sort of his sort of musical mentor, I'd say.
I see.
And I think that was the warm-up gig for Sunday.
I mean, what to say about the piece, really? I mean, it is so refined, and so every note counts, every word counts.
Yeah, I mean, and in terms of complexity, I feel like Sunday and Caroline are the two most challenging scores I've worked on.
Really?
Really, you could easily spend a morning looking at just one page and just figuring it out. It's so unexpected what happens in Sunday, and so connected with Sondheim's love of Ravel and those composers.
Yes.
I think it's his perfect sort of. I think it's his perfect piece. Allegedly, when Steve turned up to band calls in New York, my friend who was conducting said Steve did turn around at one point and say, I don't know what everyone sees in this piece. I mean, I guess it's good, but which I was nicely self-deprecating.
That is, that only he can do that.
Exactly.
It is extraordinary. It's also, and this interests me a lot. It's the only piece I know about the selfishness of the creative artists, the fact that they are insular. The fact that, it captures so well, Dot's adoration of George. And she tries everything she can to be visible, if you see what I find that incredibly moving, because when you look at the great classical composers of the past, they were deeply selfish, and look at Mahler and what he did to Alma, his wife. Told her that two composers in one family was never going to work, and she should put all her composition aside. It's horrific, but I love that about that aspect of the piece a lot, and history too. The fact that over the generations, the connections between the past and present.
I think there are couplets in Finishing the Hat which say more than entire shows, I think.
Yes.
I just think he manages to refine the ideas down so much.
Yes. Have you got a wish list, Nigel, of things that, of the classic musicals? Are there any in there that you would crave?
Well, it's always been Sunday, so that's why I really need it to happen. It has been my favourite show since I was a kid, and as I've got older, and sort of had more thoughts about what I do, it's sort of grown in significance. So, I was very excited. I'm 40 this year. I was very excited to be conducted on my 40th, but I'm happy if that's on my 41st. That would be fine, or 42nd. I really don't mind.
I don't think I've ever asked you this, Nigel, but was musical theatre always the plan when you were studying at college and stuff? What was the how did it work out?
It was a plan very early on, and then I went to King's and did quite a straight music degree, and then while I was there, I got it into my head that I might become a Wagner scholar and go into academia for about a year. But then at the same time, I started depping on My Fair Lady at Drury Lane, and so thankfully that dragged me away from writing essays about Wagner. And then after that, I went to the Royal Academy and did the very first musical directors course, which we set up with Mary Hammond. Yes. And it all sort of went from there, really. So yeah, I think it was a fairly straight course with the odd academic sort of temptation.
Interesting. I mean, are you a Wagner nut, or was that a passing phase?
Yeah, I think it was a passing phase. I'm still partial to some, but I'm quite busy, and it takes a long time, doesn't it?
Oh, it does take a long time. My goodness. Well, we've done a few concerts together over the years, and so we'll drag you to something else, but it won't be Wagner. So, look, to finish here. When do you think, I mean, Sunday in the Park with George has been rescheduled, but is that just in theory at the moment?
Yeah, we don't have dates. I think what we have is a really firm commitment that Jake and Annaleigh are really committed to the project, and they're really the two key things to make it happen. But I have everything crossed. We just don't know. We keep talking about next spring. But it's actually, what are the nuts and bolts of that? How does the model work? I don't quite know how we're going to cover shows at the moment. I feel like we're going to need to isolate understudies and all these things. So
I think it may. People are covering every base, but it may prove to be immaterial in the end, because I think the only true way we come out of this is with a vaccine, or with a more sophisticated treatment of the actual illness. There's so much they don't know, and that's what scares me, I think, because the time scale could go on, or it could be cut blissfully short, depending on what happens in the next. And isn't it interesting how time has been compressed? I mean, it seems like much longer than 10 weeks that we've been in lockdown.
Yeah. I mean, what's quite interesting is Luis, my other half, who you've met, he's currently downstairs in the kitchen working on the vaccines. So he works for the government.
My goodness, really?
Senior civil servant. So we have quite a gag sort of joke going on in our house at the moment that his work is now almost as important as mine is. But
that's the one. Well, wish him well from us all.
I will.
And thanks for the chat, Nigel.
It's great to speak to you, Ed.
And you.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.